morning and welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. Today we're going to talk a little bit about history, urbanization, and why no, it's not the fault of California that your state sucks. Alright, so I had a conversation online yesterday. It turned into one of those weird arguments where someone owns a couple of acres of land in northern Maine, so he knows everything about urban theory in the United States. I'm not sure about that. The conversation was about Appalachia, and I mentioned that, I just don't like living on that side of the Mississippi or that side of the Rockies in general, and it was, particularly interesting to me that, I like the territory, I like Appalachia as a physical space. And if it had the population of the late 19th century, 1880s, 1890s, I would be very happy to live there. Someone responded with, well, just wait till Californians start moving to your state. It'll suck. I'm like, okay, not sure what that has to do with population levels in Appalachia. But, let's take a quick look here. Move the computer over. So, I'm pretty sure that the Appalachian region, the South in general, did not actually become urban majority until the 1950s, in fact. That would be after World War II with some of the developments of the military-industrial complex. Now, of course, the classification of urban versus rural changes over time, so census data has a little bit of fungibility, but let's go ahead and talk about this. So Revan, my friend Revan, who told me that it's just going to be horrible when Californians start destroying my state, well, he doesn't know what state I live in. This becomes obvious later in the conversation when he starts telling me the things that are happening in the state I live in as if I don't live there. Of course, he doesn't live there. He lives in one of the northeastern states, not Maine. But he knows everything about Maine. So let's talk about that. I like to express a couple things about this California myth. It's a way of not thinking about problems, and if you don't think about problems, you can't solve problems or predict what sorts of reactions you need to have to problems. And just blaming a group of people, oh, the Californians did it, is horrible, because the problem here is actually urbanization, not Californians. I'd like to make a couple of points to those in the audience who consider themselves constitutionalists or libertarian or otherwise involved in the idea of constitutional protection of freedoms, such as in the Bill of Rights. California and California culture drove a lot of that basic civil liberty and incorporation movement. Remember that the Constitution does not guarantee you any rights as originally written. It restricts the federal government, federal only, from infringing on basic core civil liberties. That's kind of a basic outline of what the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, was at ratification. Now, the 14th Amendment incorporated those rights as individual liberties that the states also must abide by. But before that amendment, that was not the case. So when you go into your constitutionalist, freedom-oriented talk, don't necessarily consider yourself to be... There's originalism and then there's originalism, and they're a little bit different. There's two sides to that coin. Most of what you think of as real freedom talk, real freedom stuff, actually came out of California. It came out of... There are a whole lot of movements in California culture. Okay, and the culture of California up into the 40s and the 50s and even into the 60s was amazing. Okay, we had a fantastic outdoors culture, a fantastic growth-oriented positive economy culture. It was fantastic. Now, things are not that way now, but before you just blame California for all of your problems, remember that California is central to most of the things that you value in terms of individual liberty. We'll talk about what went wrong at another point in time. I will mention that one of the California diseases, cultural diseases, the disease of government-oriented progressivism, which has its roots all the way back in the 30s. You remember EPIC, Upton Sinclair, EPIC, and the Jeffersonian socialism actually comes from California. It's a very centrally Californian thing, and that's the idea that government will fix it. That's basically what I'm going to boil it down to. When it comes to individual liberty, government regulates. When it comes to individual access, government fixes it. That kind of thing, okay? That is very much a Californian problem. But no, it's not Californians who are destroying your state. It's urbanization. So I say this, and this guy, Revin, decides to say, yeah, well, how do you explain Maine? And I'm like, Maine's the best example. Maine has had decreasing urbanization since the 50s. In fact, Maine has traditionally been the least urbanized state in the United States, and it's at under 38% urbanized now. And I think if you go back, it might have even been earlier than the 50s. There was a point where it was almost 52% urbanized. And let's see, let me take a look at that really quick. I don't know. I'll have to look at it later. It's not quickly on this. In the Northeast in general, it was urban majority by the late 19th century, 1880s. And in certain parts, you know, Massachusetts, Rhode Island were highly urbanized, majority of the population being urbanized in the 1840s, okay? There's a reason we talk about Boston Brahmins as when we talk about urbanization. So I mentioned, or he said, well, how do you explain Maine? And I said, well, yeah, that's the perfect example. It's the least urbanized state we have. So he tries to tell me that that there's no way that can be the case because people are building houses and the population is on the rise. And it's true. The population of Maine has risen by 1.8% in the last decade. I'm not sure that's not a lot, okay? And then, have I ever been to Maine? Well, yes, I was in the Navy and I've been to Maine. He then makes a comment about being in the Marine Corps. I don't think he understood the naval base in Maine part of my comment, but he was a Marine, so maybe more crayons are necessary. So the population has risen by a couple thousand people in the past decade, tens of thousands, but the urbanization rate has gone down. So he tries to accuse me of using some sort of PC terminology for black people, because black people, this is him, this is not me, I didn't say this, black people apparently are the cause of urban shitholes or something, and I have no idea what he's talking about, okay, with that one. This is one of those arguments where things went off the rails so much, I need to do a video. So he accuses me of blaming black people instead of rich white Californians, destroying the entire voter base of a state, because only rich white Californians are in Maine, but Maine is doing really well because they have constitutional carry, and that is the thing that proves everything about good or bad state and government, is one issue. It's not even a gun rights issue or a personal liberty issue. It's just constitutional carry. That's the only example that matters for anything. So this guy's not very... For this conversation, I love the guy. He's fantastic. I want to, like... We do a lot of the same shooting things. It's all fun. But for this purpose of this conversation, very narrow-minded and not being very rational. And I'm not sure what it is. Something about paying taxes in Maine has something to do with this also, but I don't really understand. So urbanization is a process of shifts of the proportion, that's percentage, of population from rural to urban areas. Now, urban has some different definitions. Generally speaking, we talk about things where you've got a population density of over 3,000 people per square mile, or 2,000 people per square mile, or 4,000 people per square mile. There's different, like, dense urban. People measure this differently and have different labels. Dense urban label. So, for example, right now, Maine is 38.7% as of 2020 now. Okay, just over 38% urban. But then again, another state that has constitutional carry, Arizona, is way up there at, where's Arizona? Way up there at 89.8% urbanized. And there's a reason for that, and that's because the population of Arizona resides almost entirely in one urbanized area. And it's kind of funny because that Phoenix area, sixth largest metro region in the U.S., that area has a lot of wilderness land in it, so it has a different set of problems, and it behaves differently than a lot of urban areas, like, for example, in New York or New Jersey. New Jersey's 95% urban, but New Jersey doesn't have structures built into the cities, like hiking areas and stuff, the same way that, say, Phoenix does. I'm getting somewhere with this, okay? Urbanization is the problem, the primary problem that we have with liberty, freedom, and pro-humanity efforts in the United States. This is my position. Urbanization is the primary problem, not Californians, okay? Yes, I understand that if 5,000 Californians move to Texas, the entire political landscape of a state with millions of people changes. Well, no, it doesn't, okay? That's not how it works. You're trying to, this is like blaming the gypsies. You know, the gypsies come into town and someone somehow died of the flu. Well, it's the gypsies' fault. There's 5 of them in a town of 5,000 people. They must have destroyed the entire city, right? Well, no. The Californian exodus is so broad and so widespread that you don't have the same effects. Now, if you look at Las Vegas, and this is where Revan started telling me how things work in Nevada without the awareness that I'm still living in Nevada. Have lived in Nevada for a decade, and am just in the process of moving out of Nevada. What destroyed Nevada was urbanization, not specifically Californians. There's not... Nevada is the one place where you can say that the percentage of Californian refugees is actually higher. But, in general, the majority of those people are not actually Californian. They are not native, not natively born, not naturally born, not American as such. The other part of that is that in terms of percentage of the population, it's really not that high. What it is that Las Vegas is a heavily urbanized area, very heavily urbanized area. And in Nevada, you have one of those situations where the urbanized population is enough to run the state, and they have there's a vast difference between how the rural world and how the urban world works. Take a place like Missouri. Missouri is relatively urbanized. Let's find it here on the list. It's 70.4% urbanized. That's honestly that's lower half of the U.S., but it's a fairly urbanized state. However, it's a very broadly distributed state, and I have family there. That's why I used it as an example. You have a connection between the rural and the urban population that you lack in a place like Nevada. In Nevada, rural instantly means septic, well, water wars, stuff that you just don't even consider in Vegas. In Missouri, you have a lot of the same basic infrastructure and lifestyle things as you move from dense urban to light urban to suburban and stuff. And Maine, of course, has very small urban centers in terms of proportion of the population. And the majority of the population lives non-urban. Now, non-urban does not mean rural, it means not urban. Suburban, and there's so many different kinds of suburbs that I hate to use the word because people just think that it must be Gen X 1980s housing developments, and it's not. Suburban in Maine, quite often just means that you have a couple acres or you have a quarter acre. Like, the lots are bigger. The spread out is bigger. It's not a walled, gated community. Suburban gated communities are kind of like rich urban zones in a cultural sense. So, my contention is that urbanization and urban problems are what is driving your state to suck, and not a very small minority of Californians. And that if you don't recognize the difference, if you don't understand the problem, you're never going to be able to work with the problem and find solutions. Urbanization is a problem. Now, one of the things that you can do to help that is to look at urbanization in certain areas where it's not as much of a problem. Now, it's getting worse in Phoenix because of the extreme population growth. But if you look at how Phoenix was designed, how it was mapped out with lots of wilderness areas and state parks and federal parks and national monuments and the space, it looks different and it behaves different than someplace like New York City. Consider this and consider that model of rural-urban planning when you think about how to move forward with the adventure of humanity and increasing freedom. That's a long video rant just to say that you're stupid if you blame Californians for things that are not California problems. Stay sideways, and I'll see you soon.